Hey guys, today's story is about that guy that doesn't really get the hint. So this was a one-shot at a convention a friend of mine was running as his first foray into DMing. It looked like a module, but I don't know the name. Basically a load of goblins had been stealing from travelers, and were taking it back to a cave network where it turned out they were giving it to a dragon for its hoard. The people involved in this drama are myself, who was playing a male human fighter, my wife, who was a male dwarf barbarian, the DM, my sister-in-law, who was a female half-elf rogue, some random girl that wanted to go, who was playing the same female half-elf rogue, and then the problem player, who was a male elf cleric. The game had 4 set characters. Normally, I would play the cleric or the barbarian, but as I was the most experienced and had been GMing for a long time, I said I would just take what was left to fill out the party. By rule of ladies first, and all the other girls not really knowing what to do, it meant that my wife picked first, and she decided to play the dwarf barbarian to try something different, to a rogue. My sister-in-law and the girl had been talking, and asked if they could both play the half-elf rogue so that they could confer on what to do as they hadn't played before. The DM said that that was okay, and my wife offered to help them as rogue was her main class. Then that guy went next, as I'd been okay and had been telling him earlier that I main cleric, and it's a fairly back-of-the-party role, and a responsible one at that. So he picked elf cleric, which left me with the human fighter. Now, before I get into the session, I should mention that there had been red flags with the guy, so I will list a few of the big ones. For one, repeatedly talking over any woman he was near, while proclaiming how much of a feminist he was. For 2, telling us that marriage and monogamy is outdated, and a sexist concept of the monogamous patriarchy. For 3, he spent almost 10 minutes arguing why he should have won a round of Cards Against Humanity because he was smarter, and wouldn't accept that my sister-in-laws were funnier as a reason. For 4, he rejected alcoholic drinks that were bought for the table because alcohol weakens the mind. For 5, explaining to my Irish friend how stupid the Troubles in Ireland were when my friend's family were on both sides and lost family during the Troubles. For 6, telling my wife how much she reminded him of a character from My Little Pony who appeared to have severe social anxiety, and we found out later that he actually had a huge crush on that character and even had porn of that character on his phone. And lastly, he told me that my wife was good as she was, and how I should stop trying to turn her into something that she isn't. There's quite a few more, and this guy had been in our group for years, but we just couldn't get rid of him. Partly because most of us wouldn't want to tell him to sod off, because they were shy, and the 3 of us that would have didn't like to, because he had a ton of issues and we just felt sorry for the guy. But back to the campaign. As soon as the game started, that guy, who was playing the cleric, decided to take every opportunity to get into the way of my wife, who was playing a dwarf barbarian wielding a +1 great axe. He had a sling and a scimitar, and decided that as a man of God, he must be on the front line. I tried to gently explain to him that that was a bad idea. He was a purely healing and buffing cleric, no damaging spells, and that he wasn't working with a party, and continually dragged out every fight longer than it should have by getting in the way, including trying to take hits for my wife's character, and occasionally the 2 girls' rogue, though not as often. He ignored everything I said, even when I suggested fighting from the back line with the rogue, who, by the way, were playing amazingly. As with the 2 of them, they came up with really creative solutions, and pinged enemies from the back line and got the hang of backstabbing fairly quickly, which was great as my wife and I were the front line and we needed ranged support. He continued to physically get in the way to defend the barbarian dwarf and try to attack high-level enemies. The table was getting angrier, and the DM was losing control and getting disheartened, and my wife was furious at him to the point where this normally very shy and quiet woman started almost screaming at him to get to the back, or she'll chop his head off and we will go on without him. No one but him and I argued with that idea, but it continued on so much that it became a problem until we only had about 30 minutes left at the table, and we weren't even halfway through the dungeon. Finally, I passed a note to the DM that said, I tie up the cleric and carry him. He made me roll for both, and there it was. I had to abandon my bow and hand out some of my potions, but that was fine. The rogue girls were ecstatic to get a bow rather than throwing knives, and we carried on, occasionally swapping between my fighter and my wife's barbarian. And looking back on it, he tried to make escape checks less often when my wife's character was carrying him, and eventually we met the boss of the dungeon. It was a goblin chief riding a spider. Perfect, I thought. So I dumped the cleric and told him to stay there out of trouble. And so, the fight began. And that guy was constantly trying to escape, until he did. He ended up charging past the rogue on 2 HP, running past me dealing with 3 goblins, and he put himself directly between my wife's barbarian and the goblin chief she had been preparing a big attack for. An attack that would deal 3d8 plus 10 damage to said chief. He took the damage from the goblin chief, which was a 1d6 with d6 poison damage, and it nearly floored him. Said attack would have barely scratched my wife's barbarian, because of course it wouldn't. She was a barbarian and a dwarf and had advantage against goblins and poisons. After this little stunt, I lost my temper with him, and my wife having to move her character model and charge the attack a further 2 rounds, the fight was done, and we won, and I ordered him to heal the rogue while my wife and I took health potions. He still tried to heal my wife's barbarian, who throughout that entire fight only had taken 2 points of damage, and those 2 points of damage were entirely his fault for getting in the dang way. But she had her dwarf physically slap him, and in character scream at him, and he did as she said. At this point, the DM and I were done with this guy's crap, and we had 10 minutes left, so the DM showed us what was meant to be an epic dragon fight at the end of the dungeon, and the dragon flew away to speed things up, which annoyed all of us. And this all resulted in one of my first time in-character PvP moments, with all 3 of us beating the crap out of him and taking all of his loot. To which we simply claimed that the goblins did it. He of course complained to anyone that would listen, but by that point, I had taken everyone away, and was running a different game to help calm down, and was refusing to let him join in. Later on I felt bad, and would apologize to the DM on how things had went down, but he told me that he was actually happy because that guy had apparently done the same thing the day before, and learnt nothing, and would proceed to get in the way of combat to save the lovely lady he was crushing on, until he was finally told he was banned from joining in any of the one-shots being ran at the convention due to dragging the games out and making the sessions not finish due to time constraints. I would later lose contact with that guy, and I don't regret it one bit after he sent a plush of that same MLP character he fetishized, and told my wife that she was like her under the guise of a birthday present. The kicker being, her birthday is in August, and he sent it in June. Well guys, the only thing I can really say is if you have someone like this, give them a warning, and if they don't knock it off, which they probably won't, knowing these types of people, kick them out of the game. It'll save everyone aggravation. And time. But in any case, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you would like me to narrate a story, let me know. And if you would like to chat and hang out with other people, I have a Discord link in the description. But as always guys, have a good one.